Have you ever stopped to think about what can happen when someone you love most decides to cross all boundaries? I never imagined my own daughter would be capable of something so extreme. But that night, while I was sleeping, something woke me up differently. I remember feeling the damp pillow, a strange smell in the room, that strange feeling that something was very wrong. I couldn't scream. I was paralyzed, trying to understand if it was a nightmare or if it was really happening. The silence seemed greater than ever, and for a few seconds, all I could think about was everything I've sacrificed for this family. What I found when I looked in the mirror knocked me off my feet, but I need to tell you how my life got to this point. Before I explain what really happened that night, you need to understand who I was and how it all started. My name is Diane, and I was born on May 10, 1957, in a small town called Oak Ridge in rural Texas. I grew up in a simple home surrounded by cotton fields and dirt roads. I learned early on that life wasn't a free ride. My mother, Loretta, was a seamstress, and my father, Harold, worked repairing machines in a workshop across the train tracks. My older brother, Kenny, left home early, so I was the one left to help. I married young, at 20, to a man named Peter. He was a truck driver, spending weeks on the road. Our encounters were always brief, often in the wee hours of the morning, when he'd return from his route with the smell of diesel fuel on his clothes. In 1984, after nearly 8 years of trying, I finally got pregnant with Michael. 2 years later came Sarah, a pregnancy no one expected, least of all me. I remember my mother showing up that same day with a blue hand-embroidered quilt, saying that now the family was complete. The quilt still exists, tucked away in the back of the closet, full of old patches and stains that never came out, no matter how hard I tried. At 27, I started working at the city hospital, St. Agnes Memorial. It was almost 36 years of shifts, weekends swapped for weekdays off, cold lunches in a break room that smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. I never complained, but I learned early on that being a nurse isn't just about caring for the sick. We become mothers, psychologists, lawyers, and often scapegoats for stressed-out doctors. When Peter was in a road accident in November 2003, I had to deal with everything alone. He didn't make it. Michael was 19, already interning at an accounting firm. Sarah was 17 and only wanted to hang out with her friends. That time marked a turning point. Michael became quieter, moved in with me, and grew closer. Sarah, on the other hand, began to withdraw, slowly at first, then disappearing from home for days at a time. The house I fought to buy was at 118 Maple Street. It was small, with 3 bedrooms, worn carpet, and thin walls. But it was there that I raised my children, each with their own room, walls covered in band posters and height marks penciled on the back of the bathroom door. I still have the medicine cabinet I brought home from the hospital when I retired, and to this day I keep the label with my name stuck to the lid of the bandage box. The wall clock in the kitchen, which makes an annoying chime every hour, was a gift from a patient I helped recover from a difficult surgery. In the hallway, a shelf with old photos, Sarah in her cheerleading uniform, Michael hugging me at his graduation. I always tried to make the household routine revolve around small certainties, like prayers before bed and Sunday dinner, even when I was the only one at the table. On important dates, I baked everyone's favorite cake, chocolate for Michael, vanilla for Sarah. When I had time off, I devoted myself to the backyard garden, planting roses that rarely thrived, but which I insisted on replanting every year. I kept old letters from Peter in a shoebox, along with paid bills and newspaper clippings I found important. With Sarah, it was never easy. When she was little, she'd ask to be held, insisting on sleeping clinging to my arm. As a teenager, things changed. Silence came, then arguments. Any reason was enough to spark a conflict. An outfit I didn't like, a schedule she didn't keep, or simply the fact that I overly praised Michael. Sometimes, the simple act of me spending more time with him seemed to light a fire inside her. I didn't realize it at the time, but looking back, I see signs of jealousy in every blunt response, every slammed door. Even so, I tried to stay close, even when she didn't want to hear it. My life was made up of these small daily struggles, of giving up things that seemed trivial to ensure my children had enough to eat, could study, and follow a path better than mine. I always prioritized work and family, and if you ask me today, I wouldn't change a thing, even though many times I felt like I did everything for very little in return. In 2019, I retired. The hospital threw a small party, gave me a thank you plaque and a fake gold stethoscope. I laughed at the time, but I took it home. It's still in the living room drawer. Time passed, and my routine changed little. My days began to be filled with simple tasks: waking up early, making coffee, reading the local paper on the porch, waiting for Michael to get home from work, and hoping Sarah would show some sign of life. I never really went to parties. I never had many friends after I got out of the hospital. My life always revolved around that house and the people I brought into this world. But no matter how hard I tried to keep everything under control, I never imagined that, on any given night, something so out of the ordinary would happen. And worst of all, that it would come from inside my own home. Only those who have supported a family understand what it's like to carry so much responsibility and still feel like you're always in debt. Now tell me, have you ever been in the situation of giving yourself completely and still being surprised by someone you love most? What would your reaction be if your routine was turned upside down in such an unexpected way? Comment here how you would handle it. Would you have the courage to face it all in silence? Or would you let it all out? Write in the comments what decision you would make, or if you've ever experienced a moment when you felt unfairly treated in your own home. Share your story, because I want to understand how each person faces this kind of challenge. And believe me, what happened after that day changed my life forever. That night, the clock read 2:26 in the morning when I woke with a strange feeling. I was exhausted, my body heavy, and I just wanted a few more hours of rest before facing another day. It was still dark in the room, only a sliver of streetlight filtering through the curtains. It was in this silence that I felt a light touch near my head, as if someone were adjusting the pillow or pulling the sheets. I ignored it, thinking it was just in my head or perhaps one of those dreams that seem real. I turned over, but the feeling didn't go away. A few minutes later, now more awake, I noticed a different scent in the air. It wasn't perfume, nor the smell of food or medicine, but something that reminded me of the kitchen cutlery drawer, where we always keep the big scissors, the ones with the red handles, used to cut almost everything in the house. My face pressed against the pillow, and I noticed it was rougher. I ran my hand over it and felt scattered strands of hair, short and thin, some stuck to the pillowcase. For a second, I thought I was experiencing one of those hair loss spells that come with age. But it was a lot of hair, much more than would naturally fall out in one night. I sat up slowly, rubbed my face, and pulled out the strands, one by one, still not quite understanding. Sleep had made me sluggish. It took me a few seconds to realize what had happened. My fingers touched the back of my head, and there I no longer felt the usual volume, just an uneven cut, patchy areas, a few loose strands at my neck. I stood still, feeling a chill crawl up the back of my neck. I couldn't react, I just looked around. The room seemed normal, but that metallic smell, mixed with the lavender scent of the pillow softener, made me think of the kitchen, the drawer, the scissors. I tried to get up slowly, each step calculated, as if the floor of the house had become different, colder. I walked to the bathroom, turned on the light, and stared at my own reflection. That's when it hit me. My hair, which I always wore tied up, was cut in pieces, some shorter, others in tufts. The sides of my face, previously covered, now showed white skin, marked by years of sun and worry. The shock was so great that I had to rest both hands on the sink. For a few seconds, I stood still, trying to remember every detail of the night, whether I'd left the bedroom door unlocked, whether anyone had passed by in the hallway. My head was spinning, and all I could think was, why? I thought about screaming, calling someone, waking Michael, knocking on Sarah's door. But something inside me told me to wait. I remained silent, listening to the sound of my own breathing, trying to piece together this absurdity. I returned to the bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and went over it all again. The noise I'd heard before, the sound of something scraping against furniture, now made sense. It hadn't been an accident. Someone had come in, walked over to my bed, and cut my hair. The worst part was knowing that only someone who lived in that house could have done that. My head ached, not just from the shock, but from the botched cut. I ran my hand over it again, feeling every patch, every missing hair. My stomach instantly churned. My mouth felt dry, as if I were in the middle of a hospital emergency. Only this time it was me. Instinctively, I began to gather the strands of hair from the pillow and put them in a bag, just like I did at the hospital for tests. Everything there was real. None of it was a dream. And the worst part was knowing I was awake, alone, and someone had chosen to hurt me like that when I was defenseless. For a moment, I tried to convince myself that maybe it was a prank, something done by mistake. But no one cuts their own mother's hair, silently, in the middle of the night, for no reason. What scared me most wasn't the cut itself, but the fact that someone had planned every detail, waited for the moment when I was most vulnerable, and done it calmly, without haste, without any apparent remorse. I looked at the clothes thrown on the chair, the ajar door, the old rug that was crooked, as if someone had tripped on it on the way out. I sat on the edge of the bed, took a deep breath, and tried to think of what to do. My body didn't want to react, but my head was spinning, searching for an explanation. In that moment, everything I knew about my family, about my children, seemed distant. For the first time, I felt like an invisible line had been crossed within my own home, a barrier that should never have been crossed. I couldn't sleep anymore. I sat there, watching the clock tick by, listening to every noise in the house. When the sky began to lighten, I realized this wasn't just an attack on my hair. It was a mark, a message, a silent invasion of the little piece I still had. And the worst part was that standing there in the dark, I realized this was far from the biggest problem I would face, because that morning, everything I thought was safe collapsed. And what happened from that moment on showed me that I hadn't seen anything yet. Stories like these unite us because they reveal the most real and fragile aspects of a family. When something this big happens, it's impossible to leave feeling the same. Every detail of that night reveals the weight of trusting those by your side, even when everything seems safe, like now. Because stories like this need to be shared, they need to be heard by those who also feel like their routine could fall apart at any moment. And subscribe to the channel now. Here, each story pushes you to your limits, makes you question everything, makes you feel part of something bigger. What happened there was just the beginning. Now pay attention, because what came next was even harder to face. The next morning, I sat in bed for a while, unsure of what to do. I looked at my pillow again, now covered in various sized clumps of hair. I reached for the back of my neck and felt my exposed scalp, a section still scratched, as if the scissors had pulled out a few strands by the roots. I forced myself to get up and went to the bathroom, still in my pajamas, trying not to make any noise so as not to wake anyone. I turned on the light, closed the door, and stared at myself in the mirror. It was the first time in years I'd looked away from myself. The cut was uneven, crooked, leaving huge gaps on both sides. Above my right ear, there was barely a single strand left. In the front, the hair fell in spikes that ended right in the middle of my forehead, a style I'd never worn before. I tried to fix it, pulling one strand to cover another, but it only made things worse. My eyes turned red, and I felt my face heat with anger, but I didn't let a tear fall. Deep down, the biggest feeling was shame. I remembered when I was a child and my mother would cut my hair in the kitchen, always crooked, and I was terrified of going to school with that look. Only now it was different. I wasn't a girl anymore. I was 67 years old, and I felt exposed in a way I couldn't explain. The face, so familiar, seemed strange, almost like a different person. I thought of all the sacrifices I'd made, the times I'd skipped buying clothes to save money for the kids, or stayed late at the hospital so I wouldn't run out of things. I thought of Sarah's birthday parties I'd organized alone, the sleepless nights waiting for her to come home from the street, the advice she'd given that always ended in arguments. Over time, I realized that the humiliation stemmed not just from the haircut, but from everything I'd endured in silence throughout my life. I felt the anger rise again, not an explosive rage, but that old anger, accumulated from years of trying to please and ultimately being left out. I looked closer and saw that near my forehead, a few short strands of hair stuck up, as if they'd been cut in a hurry. The smell of shampoo mixed with the perfume of the scissors still clung to my skin. I glanced at the sink and saw more scattered hair. I grabbed a towel and tried to wipe it away, but with each movement, my scalp felt more sensitive, as if it had been tugged. I went to the closet and found the cap I used for gardening. I put it on, but it felt strange because the sides didn't cover the bald spots. I took a deep breath, tried not to think too much, but it was impossible. The damage was too great to ignore. I went down to the kitchen and started making coffee, as I always did, trying to stick to my routine. I put the water on the stove, separated the ground coffee, cut 2 pieces of bread, and left them in the toaster. As I stirred the sugar, I glanced at the clock on the wall, waiting to hear any movement from the bedrooms. The silence in the house seemed even greater that morning. With each step I took, I noticed details I hadn't noticed before. A door ajar, marks on the carpet near the stairs, a pair of scissors missing from the drawer. Everything was slowly beginning to make sense. Michael was the first to appear, coming down the stairs looking sleepy, as if nothing had happened. I said good morning, feigning normalcy, and he only responded by grabbing a mug from the cupboard. I tried to see if he noticed me, but he didn't comment on my hair, perhaps out of kindness or because he genuinely didn't notice. I watched, waiting for a reaction, but nothing happened. Sarah took longer. When she finally appeared in the kitchen, her hair was tied back, her gaze downcast, pretending to be playing with her phone. My body tensed, but I suppressed the urge to say anything. She just ordered coffee, didn't even glance in my direction. I noticed he looked away every time he passed me. At another time, I might have asked what happened, demanded an explanation, but that morning, I just wanted to understand how brave someone was to do that and still act normal. I noticed the bathroom trash can, which was fuller than usual, and wondered if there were more cut hairs in there, or even scissors, but I didn't have the courage to look them in the eye, not at that moment. What hurt me most was the silence, the coldness. My mind wandered, searching for other instances where I felt invisible or unappreciated. I remembered the many times Sarah said she'd rather stay at friends' houses than have dinner with me, or the parties she'd disappear from and only return in the morning, as if my concern meant nothing. I also remembered the times she'd fought with Michael for attention, as if only he deserved affection. Suddenly, all of this seemed to come back with a vengeance, throwing in my face every unappreciated sacrifice. At the same time, I felt ashamed to think that after all this, I'd become someone who provoked this kind of anger at home. What had I done so wrong? I chose to remain silent that day. I didn't want to show the pleasure of seeing my reaction, of showing how much it had shaken me. I let the house spin as usual, prepared lunch, cleared the table, sorted the laundry, every Monday of the year. Inside, however, a mixture of anger, humiliation, and an old sadness kept growing. That night, while they were already in their rooms, I locked myself in the bathroom again and stared at my own face, as if I could understand there, in the lines and wrinkles, the moment I'd lost control of the situation. It was strange, because that image in the mirror felt like a stranger, someone hurt, suspicious of everything, but still standing. I knew that was just the first impact, the beginning of a wound that doesn't heal easily. And in that moment, I realized the worst was far from over. The silence that day was only the surface. What was still hidden would be capable of shaking everything I believed about my own family. I observed every detail that morning, trying not to reveal anything more than was necessary. Sarah entered the kitchen late, dropped her backpack on the floor, and picked up her cell phone, as if she were oblivious to everything around her. I noticed the way she avoided my gaze, stirring her coffee with unnecessary force, banging her spoon against the cup, almost always looking at the floor. Michael tried to make conversation, asking if she wanted bread or if she needed money for the bus. She responded quickly, impatiently, giving him an ironic smile. It was clear she wanted to escape me, and that made me even more uneasy. As I pretended to read the day's newspaper, I noticed small signs, things that would normally go unnoticed. The first clue appeared when I entered Sarah's room to collect dirty clothes. The hamper, which she rarely used, was lying behind the door. On the desk, I found a few strands of hair tied with a rubber band. The strands were the same color as mine. I quietly picked them up, put them in my pocket, and returned to the hallway. The trash in the room was fuller than usual. I saw a candy wrapper, some makeup, and mixed in with everything, more cut hair wrapped in a piece of toilet paper. For a moment, I remembered my nursing class on collecting materials. I couldn't help but make the comparison. I wanted to laugh at the irony, but the mood was too heavy for that. The next clue came from the kitchen drawer. I went looking for the scissors to cut a bag of bread and realized they weren't in their usual place. I only found them when I opened the second drawer, next to the sink. It was the red-handled scissors, the ones I always keep at the back of the first drawer, out of the children's hands. They were poorly cleaned, with a strand of hair stuck to the blade. I tried not to think too much, but that scene stuck in my head. The sum total of details was too great to be a coincidence. With every step I took around the house, the tension grew. Michael, unaware of anything, stayed closer to me all day. He helped me wash the dishes after lunch, offered me a ride when I needed to go to the pharmacy, and constantly asked if I wanted to talk. I sensed a sincere effort on his part, as if he sensed something was wrong but couldn't quite put his finger on it. When he tried to include his sister in conversations, Sarah withdrew even further. She wouldn't respond properly, changed the subject, or left the room. Amidst this silence, I began to revisit some old memories. Sarah had always had difficulty accepting the closeness between Michael and me. Ever since she was a child, she'd throw tantrums when she saw us laughing together, complaining that I paid too much attention to her brother. A scene from 2006 came to mind. On Michael's birthday, when I bought him a watch, Sarah made a point of saying, in front of everyone, that her gift was worse simply because it was a cheaper toy. In 2011, when Michael got into university, his sister simply disappeared from home for almost a week, and when she returned, she pretended nothing had happened. She kept telling everyone that no one cared about her. Time passed, but the pattern remained. With each of Michael's achievements, a greater distance grew between them. Even as an adult, Sarah seemed to harbor a kind of silent anger, an unresolved resentment that I, honestly, could never fully understand. I recalled trivial arguments that turned into a storm, the way she would slam the bedroom door, the aggressive way she talked about her brother to her friends, as if fighting for space that in her mind was never enough. That day, all these details began to come together in my head like pieces of a puzzle that suddenly made sense. It wasn't just the haircut, it was a whole story of jealousy, envy, and accumulated hurt. Sarah's gesture was just the culmination of something I'd been ignoring for years. Instead of immediate confrontation, I decided I needed to think carefully about how to react. I didn't want to yell or turn it into another show at home. I took a deep breath, remembered the prayers I'd always said for patience, and asked for clarity. I felt the need to act calmly, but I also knew I couldn't pretend nothing had happened. As Sarah walked out that afternoon, passing me without a word, I sensed this was just the beginning. The tension in the house was almost palpable, the heavy atmosphere of a poorly kept secret. I began to realize that my response needed to be planned. It wasn't just a matter of whether or not to cut my hair again. It was about rebuilding a family that, in essence, had already been shattered for a long time. And in that moment, it became clear. How I chose to handle this would change everything from then on. What was coming had the power to turn our lives upside down, and this time, it wasn't my choice. I spent that night awake, lying on my side, staring at the bedroom ceiling. I thought of everything I could say to Sarah, all the questions I wanted to ask, but with each thought came the certainty that if I exploded there, it wouldn't solve anything. In the morning, I made a point of following the household routine without fuss. I made coffee, loaded the laundry, watered the plants in the backyard, and went straight to my room to pick up the old phone I rarely use. I called a longtime friend, Rose, whom I met at the hospital back in 1988 during my second year of night duty. She'd been out of the hospital for a while, opened a small salon in the back of her house on Oak Street, and she's one of those people who listens more than she talks. When she answered, I couldn't hold back. "Rose, I need you, but it's not a medical emergency. It's worse." She heard my voice and made an appointment just for me before the salon opened at 7:15 the following Saturday morning. On Friday, I avoided any arguments as much as possible. I watched Sarah carefully, saw when she came and went, noticed the messages she exchanged on her cell phone, the quiet conversations on the phone. I noticed she got irritated every time Michael came to talk to me and walked away when things got heated. Instead of confronting her, I started changing some rules in the house. I removed my bedroom key from the door, locked my document drawer, and locked the bathroom cabinet with the old padlock, the kind only I have the key to. I stopped mixing her laundry with mine and told her that food would be served at the right times and that each of us would be responsible for our own plate after meals. Sarah noticed something was different, but said nothing. He just looked at me with a mixture of anger and suspicion, as if I'd crossed an invisible line. That night, I sat in the living room, turned on the television quietly, just for background noise. I went to my bedroom, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed. I grabbed the Bible, the old one with the black cover that had been with me since my wedding day. I kept it open to Psalm 23, repeating silently, "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will not be afraid, for you are with me." I asked for strength, patience, and wisdom. I asked not to feel hatred, because if I let anger take over, I knew it would only make things worse. It's not easy to see someone you expect everything from do the very thing that hurts the most. I asked not to lose faith, not to become bitter. As difficult as it was, I wanted to be strong, not just for myself, but for the whole family. On Saturday, I left home earlier than usual. I told Michael I was going to the grocery store and left Sarah sleeping. I walked to Rose's salon, where she was already waiting for me with a white towel in her hands. When she saw me, she said nothing. She just pointed to the chair and waited for me to start talking. I told her everything, as directly as possible, without embellishing, without crying. Rose was silent for a few minutes, then examined my hair as if it were a serious emergency. She said it could be fixed, but that some uneven cuts would need time to grow back. "It'll hurt a little," she warned, "but it won't be forever." I sat there, closed my eyes, and let her do her work. The silence between us was comfortable, and the only thing that shook me out of my trance was the sound of the scissors and the smell of the strong shampoo. While Rose cut it, I wondered what I would do to Sarah. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want a scandal. I just wanted her to see the gravity of what she'd done. I decided I wouldn't tell Michael, at least not yet. I would wait for the right moment. I returned home with my hair shorter, the bald spots less visible, but with a strange feeling of having changed inside as well. I left my bag on the couch, sat in the backyard, and watched Sarah through the bedroom window, pacing restlessly. At lunch, she came down again in silence, and I remained firm. I didn't force conversation. I didn't provoke. I simply made it clear, through my actions, that some things had changed. I wrote down all the schedules, organized the house, and created small tasks that never existed before. Sarah seemed increasingly uncomfortable, as if expecting an explosion at any moment. The atmosphere in the house was tense, but also expectant, as if everyone was sitting on something about to explode. Deep down, I wanted her to feel the weight of her own choice, but without having to raise her voice or create a scene. It was a silent strategy, a clear message that everything has consequences, even the things we do when we think no one will notice. I repeated the prayer ritual every night, asking for the same thing: clarity and calm. I prayed for the best way to show Sarah how far she'd come. I didn't want to humiliate her, but I also wasn't about to let her down. On the outside, I was all routine and silence. On the inside, I was a woman learning through force to reinvent herself. And yet, I knew none of it would be enough to heal what had been cut there. What I planned for the coming days was deeper than any haircut. It was the chance to show my daughter that her choices could, indeed, change everything. And that, for someone who thought she had control of the situation, would be the hardest shock to face. On Sunday, I woke up early, washed my face, and didn't hide behind a scarf or a cap. My hair, short, uneven, with some visible patches, was now part of my face. I set the living room table, spread out the clean tablecloths, took the dishes out of the old cabinet, and arranged the silverware on the white napkin I only use on special occasions. Michael turned 29 that day, and even with the strange weather, I decided it was important to maintain the tradition of family lunch. I called my sister, invited 2 cousins, and asked them to bring fresh bread and a simple cake. Sarah spent the whole morning locked in her room, only coming down when the smell of food filled the house. As the guests arrived, the sound of conversation filled every corner of the room. Michael hugged his relatives, laughed at old stories, and tried, unconsciously, to pull Sarah closer. I kept a smile on my face, but inside I calculated every minute, waiting for the best moment to say what needed to be said. Lunch was served at 1 o'clock sharp, as always. I prepared roast chicken, potato salad, and rice with carrots, dishes Michael has loved since childhood. Everyone sat at the table, the cake in the center, the candles already set out. As I served the juice, I noticed Sarah barely touched her food. Her gaze roamed the table, but she avoided mine the entire time. Minutes later, during the birthday song, Michael asked me to give a speech. I stood up, took a deep breath, and set my plate aside. With the room silent, I began by thanking everyone for coming, talking about how the family had been through many ups and downs and yet remained united. I looked at Michael, then at Sarah, and said, "The greatest asset we can have in our home is trust. Without it, nothing works. Sometimes trust is suddenly broken, without warning, and it takes a while for us to figure out how to put the pieces back together." At that moment, I saw Sarah's face change. She stood still, her fork poised in midair, staring at me. I continued, "In the last few days, I've been forced to deal with an unexpected cut. A cut that wasn't just to my hair. It was a cut to trust, to respect, to the certainties I thought were solid." The room fell silent. I felt everyone's eyes on me. I decided not to turn this into a fight or a scandal. I decided to forgive, because I know that old hurts make us act in ways we don't always understand. I forgive whoever did this, but I hope that one day they understand what it truly means to hurt someone when they're defenseless. Michael stared at me, uncomprehending. My sister lowered her gaze. The cousins looked uncomfortable, as if they'd entered into a conversation that was too private. Sarah, who had been holding her plate until then, dropped her cutlery on the table, lowered her head, and blushed. I saw her eyes well up. She tried to hide it, but the tears began to flow. She stood up quickly, pushed back her chair, and left the room, stumbling on the carpet. No one said anything, nor did they try to stop her. The silence grew heavy, each lost in their own thoughts. I stood still for a few seconds, then finished by saying, "Trust can't be cut and then put back together in the same way. Those who love need to think twice before crossing a line." No one said anything. Michael went after his sister. My sister came to me and hugged me silently. I sat on the couch staring at the untouched cake. Inside, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. The message had been sent. The cut was now exposed for all to see, and there was no longer any way to sweep the wounds under the rug. What would come after that lunch, I didn't know. But one thing was certain. After revealing that truth, nothing in that house would be the same again. The week after lunch, the household routine changed completely. Sarah hardly left her room. She spent most of her time lying down, pretending to sleep when I passed by in the hallway, or put food on the table. The sound of her soft crying, muffled by her pillow, was constant throughout the night. She didn't insist on talking. I tried to leave space, even though I wanted to barge in and demand an explanation. Michael changed too. He became more present, helped with the chores, and every day when he came home from work, he made a point of asking if I was okay. One day, while cleaning up the dishes, he hugged me from the side and said softly, "You've always been stronger than you think, Mom. I would never have had the courage to go through all this without losing my temper." The simple gesture moved me, but it also carried a huge weight. I never wanted to be an example of resistance. I just wanted peace in the house. News of what happened spread. First, my sister texted me to apologize for the times she doubted my parenting style. Then a cousin called to say she now understood how I felt every time I asked for help and no one paid attention. Even a neighbor, Donna Estella, came to visit, brought a cornbread, and spent hours talking on the porch. "Diane, your courage inspires. It's not every day someone exposes such pain without turning it into a war." I heard everything, even from people who hadn't spoken about their birthdays. It was strange to receive so much recognition, but I realized that, little by little, that truth exposed at lunch made those around me begin to rethink their attitudes. Some apologies came late, but they still served to soothe old hurts. Meanwhile, Sarah remained distant. For 3 days, she barely left her room. When she did come downstairs, she walked with her head down, avoiding my eyes. She didn't participate in meals and only responded with yes or no. Michael tried to break the ice, but he wasn't forcing it. Early on the 4th night, I heard the bedroom door open slowly. Sarah appeared in the hallway, her face swollen, her eyes red from crying. She stopped at the living room door and stood there, silent, unable to speak. I said nothing. She stood there for a few seconds, then slowly approached and collapsed. She sat next to me on the couch, covered her face with her hands, and began to cry in a way I'd never seen before. Between sobs, she said, "I'm sorry, Mom. I can't explain what was going through my head. I was so angry, so jealous. It wasn't at you. It was at myself. I just wanted someone to see how hurt I was." Hearing that was painful, but at the same time, liberating. The feeling of having failed as a mother was strong, but I also realized she was there, opening up for the first time in a long time. I waited for her to calm down and responded calmly. "Sarah, I forgive you. But trust, daughter, it doesn't come back the same way. It will take time, but I'm here, and I won't give up on you." She hugged me tightly, clinging to me like she used to when she was little. We stayed there, holding each other, unhurried. For the first time in years, I felt I could breathe without fear of walking on eggshells. The following days were filled with small attempts. Sarah began appearing in the kitchen to help make coffee, asking if I needed help with the groceries, and even striking up a conversation with Michael, trying to bridge the gap between them. The atmosphere in the house improved, but it was clear there was still a gap between what we were and what we were trying to be. The scars from the haircut gradually faded, but the memories of that episode remained in every silence, every lingering look. I knew nothing would ever be exactly the same again, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like the house was moving, not stuck in pain, but slowly moving towards something new. Trust, like hair, takes time to grow. And every day I told myself, no matter how big the wound, what matters is the effort not to leave it open forever. After everything I've been through, I keep thinking about how much life can change in an instant, and yet we still find a way to move on. It's not easy to talk about pain, especially when it comes from someone you raised, loved, defended, and protected for so long. I never imagined I would experience such humiliation in my own home. But if there's one thing I've learned from this story, it's that we only discover our own strength when we can no longer hide from what's happening. Faith was what kept me going on the worst days. I've always prayed, but I've never felt the need to ask for guidance as much as I did during that time. There were nights when all I could repeat were the same words, asking for calm so I wouldn't explode, wisdom so I wouldn't further hurt someone who was already hurt. There were mornings when it seemed impossible to get out of bed, face the mirror, pretend to be normal. But every time I thought I couldn't handle it, something pushed me forward, even if it was just to do the basics, make coffee, tidy the house, say good morning. And in that process, I realized that faith isn't a formula for avoiding suffering. It's a way to move forward, even when all seems lost. I look back and see how heavy forgiveness is. It's not a pretty feeling, nor is it easy to practice. Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting, nor does it mean brushing everything aside. It's looking into the eyes of the person who hurt you and saying, "You hurt me, but I won't let that define who I am or who you can become." It was difficult to accept that my daughter needed help as much as I did. It hurts to realize that her pain stemmed from years of accumulating resentment, jealousy, and insecurities that I may not have fully grasped. This made me rethink my own stance. How, without realizing it, I'd been failing to express my feelings, remaining silent where I needed to set boundaries. In this story, I understood that love isn't about silently accepting everything. Love often means knowing how to say no, setting limits, protecting one's own dignity, even when one's heart tells one to give in. And most importantly, understanding that we aren't responsible for every choice others make, not even our children's. We do our best, but there comes a point where each person must bear the consequences of their own actions. The haircut became just another memory, a visible symbol of a deeper cut, one that was being mended day by day. Some people think betrayal only happens between couples, but I discovered that the worst wounds can come from within the family. Even so, I chose not to be a prisoner of that episode. Forgiveness doesn't erase what happened, but it has restored my peace and allowed me to look forward with hope. If you're listening to this right now, you may be experiencing a situation where someone close to you has hurt you. I want to tell you that there's no magic formula to heal what's been hurt, but it's possible to start over. Have the courage to set boundaries. Don't let other people's pain become your prison. And don't lose faith that better days are ahead, even when everything seems dark. I'm proof that it's possible to survive pain, rebuild your dignity, and emerge stronger on the other side. No one chooses to go through certain trials, but everyone can choose what they'll do after everything falls apart. And if I could find a way to start over, you can too. No matter how many times life shatters your certainties, there's always time to rise, forgive, and build something new from what's left. Now tell me, what would you do in my shoes? Comment below, because I want to see who would have the courage to face what I experienced. Tell me the truth. Would you have had the strength to forgive, Or would you have reacted differently? I want you to share in the comments what your decision would have been, or share your own family story, especially if you faced an unfair situation or something that left a lasting impression on you. Your experience matters and can help many people listening right now. I know this story resonated with you. It's impossible to come away unscathed from a story like this because it touches the most human part of us: fear, loss, courage, survival. You felt the impact of every choice, every silence, every boundary crossed at home. Now, leave your like. Every reaction strengthens our community and helps stories like this reach further. This story captivated you because it's real. Subscribe to the channel to continue following stories that challenge human limits and show what it means to truly survive, even when everything seems to be falling apart. Here, every detail is designed to make you feel, reflect, and be moved, and so that no one has to go through these moments alone. Turn on notifications now. You're already part of this story just by getting this far. You who are listening know that stories like these cannot be forgotten. Each shared story transforms those who listen, those who comment, and those who choose not to remain silent in the face of the deepest pain. When real stories are valued, they reach those who need to hear them. So share this video. Tag someone who needs this wake-up call, this example, this new beginning. Now get ready. What happened here was intense, but what you're about to see challenges everything we think we know about courage and resilience. The next video is already on screen. Click now. Come with me. You won't leave this channel the same person. I want to hear your comment, your story, your truth. Let's create a chain of strength and learning here in the comments. Write, "I would have forgiven," or declare how you would have acted. Your voice is part of this story. And don't leave without watching the next video. What follows is simply unbelievable. Watch now.